Okay, that was Benadryl, and um, I'm gonna see how long I can make it through this fever without feeling drowsy because I took Benadryl, and it's children's Benadryl, so technically it's like for kids, but I took more than the amount because I'm not a kid, so we'll see. That was stupid. Anyway, I have such bad allergies. I had to remake this video because I was literally just sneezing and coughing, and I looked like I was like spreading germs to you guys via internet because I was just so like a mess. So hopefully I'm a little less a mess. But we're gonna start and we're gonna answer the question: what can we learn about American history by examining the Kennedy administration? We're on week 22, I think, by the way. So although the Kennedy administration in the early 60s are often overlooked in favor of the more domestically transformative late 1960s, Kennedy's administration and the first years of the decade were a period that were really highly influential and transformative. We can see the three ways that the Kennedy administration was influential and transformative through cultural power, soft power, and then lastly, the emergence of a distinctly American aesthetic. So during the Kennedy administration, a lot of American power kind of hit its peak in a lot of ways. There was a lot of ongoing conflict with Russia during this period, and um, even with all this conflict, JFK was still had a really strong grasp on power and on political influence, and America was kind of very united as a whole on this front. We're gonna kind of go zip through a timeline of the Kennedy administration just to understand a lot of the tension that was going on. Cold War era obviously. There's the missile gap debate in 1958. Kennedy is kind of beginning to start his presidential campaign, and he is really arguing that there's a really big gap between the amount of missiles the Soviets have and the amount of missiles that the Americans have. And Kennedy really argues that we need to up the ante on our nuclear weapons. We need to catch up. And this is kind of interesting because, in fact, there isn't a missile gap at this time between the US and the Soviet Union. But this is part of the thing that helps Kennedy win his 1960 election against Richard Nixon. And that happens in 1960. Obviously, I think I just said that. There's also the Bay of Pigs invasion that happens in 1961. A lot of Cubans had fled from Cuba, are trained by the CIA to fight as a military group and to kind of basically come back into Cuba, invade Cuba, and take it back from the communist, or he's communist leader Fidel Castro. And this goes horribly wrong, and this is at the beginning of the Kennedy administration. And Kennedy administration kind of backs out. It just goes so wrong, the invasion. And then there's the Berlin crisis that happens at the same time. The wall is built, all of that great stuff. A lot of tension between Krushchev. I swear I know how to say his name. You'll blame everything on Benadryl in this video, so. But between him and Kennedy, there's the Vietnam escalation, and then there's the Cuban Missile Crisis, which is in 1962. And this is one of the really tense moments in the Cold War, which they're basically on the edge of um, missile war, nuclear war, using their missiles, which anyway, yeah. So all of this happened, and thankfully that Kennedy and Khrushchev were able to kind of deter this crisis from happening and go through a diplomatic way instead of just destroying and blowing up and like dealing with like a nuclear holocaust, which would have been insane. And probably, yeah, so that's all the stuff that happens in the 1960s. And like I said in the beginning of this Viva, like even in all this tension, the fact that Kennedy had political power and was able to keep America together and from the brink of like mad or mutual assured destruction is pretty amazing. And then sadly, he is assassinated in 1963. Yeah, and that's our first point. We looked at the political power. And then I want to end this point with a quote from Jackie Kennedy. She talks to Life magazine after her husband dies about reminiscing kind of about what the White House was like during her husband's presidency, and she uses a reference from the musical Camelot, which was one of the Kennedy's favorite musicals, and she says, this is from the Camelot, that says, "Don't let it be forgot that once there was a spot for one brief shining moment that was known as Camelot." And this was one of John F. Kennedy's favorite lyrics from the musical. And Jackie kind of talks about this line and says that there'll be great presidents again, but there'll never be another Camelot again. It will never be that way again. So this kind of sums up the feeling of everyone, even Kennedy's wife, obviously Kennedy's wife, of saying this was what the administration was. It was this Camelot, and though there'll be greatness after, it'll never be the same. It'll never be Camelot again. So that leads us into our next point, which is talking about the idea of soft power, which is defined as a country's ability to have control over other people or other countries without using force or coercion. Force. And due to Kennedy's youthful appeal, combined with all these cultural and technological developments that are happening during this time, America really easily has a grasp on this post-war world, and doesn't have to use force or coercion, and just kind of through ambassadors like Louis Armstrong and a lot of kind of sneaky ways is able to have power over other countries. And as Winston Churchill puts it, the empires of the future are the empires of the mind. What's really interesting about the Cold War is that in a lot of ways, although it was kind of a fight for the missiles and a lot of between capitalism and communism, in a lot of ways it was a very cultural war, and it was a clash of cultures between the USA and the Soviets. I hear something. I'm just paranoid. Yeah, it was a clash of cultures, and at this clash of cultures, in the very center of it is Europe and Europe's universities, which is really interesting. And part of this cultural Cold Wars is America's use of people like Louis Armstrong, great jazz musician, who was appointed as a goodwill jazz ambassador. That was his title, and he was paraded around Europe as a kind of a symbol of social freedom, of American social freedom, and how African American liberties had been granted. So the government used him to show this ideal, showing us how much soft power they were kind of developing in the world. And another really interesting thing that I kind of touched on last week was the CIA and how I think we started talking about abstract expressionism. What's really interesting is how the CIA used art and specifically abstract expressionism as a weapon in the Cold War. We have to remember that when the Cold War was founded in the late 1940s, I think it's 1947, it was an organization that was run by people that had graduated from Ivy League schools like Harvard and Yale. These people had a rich background in the arts and in literature and were very appreciative of these measures and methods. So when they were fighting the Cold War, they used things like art and literature to have influence in this cultural Cold War, as it has been called. And they used art and specifically abstract expressionism, which if you missed last week, which please don't go back because it's a long viva, but if you missed it, I basically talked about Jackson Pollock and abstract expressionism and his use of like what looks like just nothingness to signify, I guess it's supposed to mean nothing, but the CIA used this as a show again of look at how much creative freedom people have in the USA, and they tried to make propaganda using abstract expressionism. A lot of these exhibitions and artists were paraded around Europe and other countries to kind of tour and show what American cultural freedom looked like. There's also Encounter magazine, which is a left-leaning magazine that was used by the CIA and another organization that was run by the CIA to promote an anti-Stalinist left. The CIA really wanted to strengthen the left in a lot of ways and not just be like people were in the McCarthy era, which just responded really strongly against communism, and they wanted to create a left that was conducive for people and that gave them another option other than the communism of Stalin. So they promoted organizations and magazines like Encounter magazine to kind of give people another option if they didn't want to be Republicans, but they needed some kind of in-between between the left and the extreme left, if that makes any sense. We also need to talk about technology during this time. I almost dropped my thing. In the 10 years of this decade, there was so much technological innovation. Obviously, one of the biggest events of the 60s was the man on the moon. Kennedy made a promise following the Pigs disaster that they would have a man on the moon within the decade, which is a huge, ambitious goal to set. But NASA did it. They put a man on the moon. Wait, they didn't put Louis Armstrong on the moon. No, I'm thinking of someone else. Okay, I'm getting out of it. I need to stop because I'm losing it. Anyway, think I'm on the third point. Oh no, I'm still on point 2. I'm sorry. I lied. So anyway, the Telestar was designed, and if you don't know what the Telestar is, it was the first intercontinental connecting satellite that was used so that people could call each other from across the world, and really opened up a lot of communications. A funny thing about this Telestar is how much it affected the culture. The archetypal normal soccer ball that we think of today was actually modeled after the Telestar as an ode to the Telestar satellite. And it really, all these things with the technology of the early 60s and the man on the moon, and then all these, like the CIA using art, all show the US's soft power. And then we're going to look at the emergence of a uniquely American aesthetic. I need to go to bed, but I'm going to finish this FIFA. The Kennedys bring a really unique American aesthetic. Before his administration, and kind of mostly before the war, America in a lot of ways had looked to Europe and tried to mirror its art and its music and its literature, and jazz was kind of the only thing before the 60s that had emerged as distinctively American. But the 60s brought about a time when there was an even more unique American aesthetic. And this was in everything from expressionism to surf rock. We're going to look at the American fashion, men's fashion, and then the music to show this. So from the Kennedy Presidential Library, it says that Mrs. Kennedy believed American civilization had come of age. In the world of fashion, she became a trendsetter. Her taste influenced designers, magazines, newspapers, and the public. The Kennedys as a family really influenced American fashion. They stopped wearing hats, so the men kind of stopped wearing hats. You can see this weird time, nobody's wearing their fedoras or whatever anymore. A really casual look comes out as distinctively American that gets progressively more casual till we are where we are today, and kind of all of this sets the tone for the casual American fashion, things like shaggy sweaters. If you don't know what a shaggy sweater is, it's kind of the classic like sailor kind of Eddie Bowers look with like the collared like Oxford shirt underneath and like a sweater, men's sweater. The Ivy look comes about with soft shoulder blazers and buttoned down Oxford shirt, which is a more stiff fabric than the like lighter fabrics that were used before. The 60s bring about pop pants, so they'd have like the different red pants and salmon pants that the men would wear. Mostly men's fashion that we're focusing on, but whatever, who cares. So yeah, that's the fashion, and the Kennedys influenced us in a lot of ways. And then a little bit about music. The Beach Boys, very iconic surf rock, and a lot of bands, not bands like them, like groups like them, emerged during the early 60s, and the American style in a lot of ways was developed, and this was a tradition really influenced by very lush harmonic sounds and kind of the glee clubs of America. So Brian Wilson was the head and like kind of the mastermind behind the Beach Boys, which started as a family band type thing. he talked about his music and said that I'm writing a teenage symphony to God. What the Beach Boys did was, for the first time, they made an American music that elevated music to art. And this Brian Wilson's quote mirrors this. One of their songs, The Warmth of the Sun, was actually written just following the Kennedy assassination. And Mike Love, who, oh gosh, I think he's their cousin. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure he's their cousin. He talks about the experience of writing this song following in the hours that they had just heard about the Kennedy assassination. He and Brian Wilson, they really feel this like deep pain inside of them and the hurt of this like collective hurt from the assassination. And he talks about it and says, for a bunch of carefree guys in our early 20s who until this point had been mostly living a life of fun, our innocence was lost, our nation was mourning. So The Warmth of the Sun is a song written by the Beach Boys to basically commemorate this moment and this pain and mourning that America was going through following the Kennedy administration. And Elton John says of the Beach Boys that the Beach Boys are what America is, which is what I'll end with. We kind of started talking about the rise of the Kennedy administration, the political power he had, and then we talked about the soft power with the CIA using abstract expressionism as a weapon in the Cold War, Louis Armstrong, and then the Telestar technology and all that good stuff. And then we ended talking about a really distinct American aesthetic through the clothing, really influenced by the Kennedys in this era, and then through the music of the time, and mostly the Beach Boys. We kind of, yeah. So I hope you have a good week. I don't think I can keep my eyes open much longer. May have taken a few milliliters too much of the Benadryl, but that's okay. Okay, have a good night. Bye.